Today's sermon is dwelling in the house of the Lord, and I want to add Psalm 23 to the readings today. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. When I look at these three passages that are the lectionary readings for today, I see a progression. And I look especially at the passage where it talks about suffering. There are many passages that over the centuries have been abused. You know, Steve, I think you and I have talked about some of those. But so often, we've heard people who were enslaved or brutalized. A friend of mine was an abused woman, and she heard people quoting this passage saying, "What you suffer now, you will be rewarded for later." It really can be used as a justification for setting aside what Micah calls us to do, which is to do justice. It has been used to encourage people to settle when they should have pushed back. So instead, I want to focus on this progression of what it means to be God's and to dwell in the house of the Lord. So on this passage about abuse, I want to focus on the backside of it. When he was abused, he did not return abuse. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but he entrusted himself to the one who judges justly. He himself bore our sins in his body on the cross, so that having died for sins, we might live in righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed. For you were going astray like sheep, but now you have returned to the shepherd and guardian of your souls. So when we look at this world that we live within, are we able to follow the life and ministry of Jesus? When abuse comes our way, what are we instinctively and also trained into doing? If somebody hits at me, I'm trained to hit back and hit back harder. My beloved grandmother, who was so sweet and wonderful in so many ways, taught me, "Tanya, never start anything, but you better finish it." That lesson is in here. I think I'm a nice person, but boy, that lesson is still in there. Right? That's not what we're supposed to do. Now, sometimes we have to fight. It's unfortunate. What are we going to do with Hitler? But we're called to, when we can, which is almost always, to fight against that instinct, whether it is inborn or has been built into by an overzealous grandmother. We don't return abuse for abuse. We seek healing. We seek reconciliation without setting aside the need to do justice and the need to love kindness and the deep, deep need for humility so we can walk humbly with our God. You're going to get sick of Micah 6:8. It happens to be one of my favorites because I think it's a nice centering piece, the way that this one is. Jesus did not return abuse for abuse. But in that moment, he loved and he forgave and he created possibilities. How often when we are angry do we shut down possibilities instead of opening them up? How often do we look and say, I wonder where this abuse is coming from? There was a kid that I grew up with, and he and I fought, and I really used Grandma's rule for a lot of years. I think the last time we went toe-to-toe was I was in 6th grade. Took Grandma's lessons way too long. But it wasn't until I got to be an adult, because he always started it. That is my defense. And I was obeying my grandmother. That's my second defense. But I wasn't following Jesus. And it wasn't until I was grown and well grown that it crossed my mind, where is that abusive behavior coming from? From this little boy that I met in kindergarten and fought with all the way through 6th grade. What pain did he bear that needed healing? What abuse was he seeing or suffering? If we return abuse for abuse, it short circuits healing. There's something important in this message that is so often abused. Because the focus on, if you suffer, you'll be made holy, or, what you suffer here, you will be replenished. Let's focus on the back half. What did Jesus do? He didn't return abuse. He loved and he forgave. And that's the path of healing. That's the path of salvation. And then the second one, Acts, which is, I think, the next level. First of all, don't hit back. Don't abuse the abusers. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teachings and fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. Awe came upon everyone because many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. I think of St. Monica, who was sainted just because any mother that could somehow convert Augustine, as wild and crazy as he was, has to be a saintly woman, right? That was a wonder. What, you got him to church? Whew. Sometimes the wonders are very simple wonders. But all who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. And day by day, the Lord added to their numbers those who were being saved. When we look at the history of the church, one of the things that converted so many was the fact that these early Christians loved their neighbors. And not just in an abstract, esoteric way. They loved them by breaking bread with one another. They loved by doing good works, by caring for those in their neighborhood, by caring for one another. People were astounded that in a world that is so often dog eat dog, here are people saying, I have only a small amount, let me share it. I was telling a story, Jack, this is Jack's fault. I was telling a story earlier about my great-grandfather. And he was the type of person that opened his doors to everyone. There's no judgment. As soon as someone would knock on the door, he would open the door and tell a white lie. I was just in the middle of making coffee. Tanya, you entertain them. Let me go finish it up. He was never making coffee. But he went and got coffee, and he found something sweet, and we sat down and broke usually Little Debbie's with one another. You know, every now and then, if it was close to Sunday, we'd have a pie or a cake. But by the end of the week, it was Little Debbie's. But when we thought he was dying, he lived about another 10 years. But I was, 11, 12 years old. And the family had gathered around the bed there at the hospital. And I was little, so of course I couldn't swim my way in. I was kind of pushed out the way the little kids are. And there was a knock on the door, and an old man started walking, and then realized what he was seeing, and he backed out. It was an old African-American man, and he looked at me, and he motioned me over to him, and he said, "Do you belong to Mr. Curtis?" And I was like, "Hey, he's my great-grandfather." And he said, "Let me tell you what kind of man your great-grandfather is. Back when we were young, we didn't have anything. We didn't have any money. And he said, my food had to go to my kids first, and then my wife, and there was not enough left for me. And your great-grandfather would sit down and cut his sandwich in half and share it with me. And that's how I ate at work. It was half his sandwich." And he said, "There's not another man that would have done that for me." That's the kind of man your great-grandfather was. That's what these early Christians were, because we were divided every which way. Jewish, not Jewish, Roman, not Roman. Did you worship this God or that God? And the Christians didn't ask, who are you? What's your background? Are you in my group? What did they do? They brought their things together and they distributed to those in need so that all were served. When do we do that in this modern world? I'm not talking about St. Martin's. I'm talking we humans. Aren't we all keeping some sort of scorecard in the back of our head? Some kind of list of who's in and who's out, and I'm not going to sit with them. And did you hear that they were, who was over at so-and-so's house? They won converts because they didn't ask questions beyond, do you have a need? And many were saved. Isn't that what dwelling in the house of the Lord is? Of knowing that we are God's, but so are they. Because all of us are beloved children of God. Now sometimes we mess up, and we're like the prodigal son, and we blow dad's money or mom's money or grandma's money. But the extravagant welcome of God is there to bring us home. Can we do that too? Can we ignore whatever it is that the world has said, but not them? It's one of the things that I think in modern days we lose about the story of the Good Samaritan. The Samaritans were the most hated community within the Jewish community. I mean, they hated the Romans, but boy, they really hated the Samaritans. And so we lose how shocking that story is to the ears of that day when Jesus said, all the people that you look up to, they'll pass you by. But look at this Samaritan. And they're like, oh no, not the Samaritans. Not them. Because they were the most hated. And Jesus said, we've got to be like them. We've got to be like this. The stories Jesus told were shocking. So who is our Samaritan? Who is that person or that group that we have so pushed out we can't even imagine accepting help from? And we're more likely to accept help than extend it. We're called to be like that Samaritan. So who are our Samaritans? Who are the ones that, boy, it's so hard for us to act as if we are dwelling in the house of the Lord? Because the Lord is my shepherd, not will be. And we often separate the world. You know, the world is bad and God's realm is good and never the twain shall meet. Jesus, God is with us here. God walks with us here. And we are called to do justice and to love kindness right here. We're dwelling in the house of the Lord here, and it's not just in these four walls. There is nothing that is not God's. The question is can we dwell in this house, this creation, as God wants us to, today and tomorrow, and when we're nervous, and when we're afraid, and when we're angry, and when we're facing abuse? Can we take that deep breath and instead of reacting, even if it's what Grandma told you to do, can you say, like I did when I was in 6th grade, the last time I beat him down, because I did. It was so bad. I was such a bad child on that point. Just with him. That was it. Grandma told me to. But it was after that last fight, I was like, this is not the person I want to be. And thank goodness I had my great-grandfather saying, honey, I told you that. You love everybody, even if they're hard to love. We're called to dwell in the house of the Lord now, because this surely is the house of the Lord.